Anne and I have a little announcement to make. We're getting married.
Anne, the window's tinted. Where are we going?
My place. You believe in ghosts, Anne? You've seen her, haven't you? Yeah, she has. She's seen her.
At the beginning of the movie, a pregnant woman is traveling in a cab when she suddenly sees a woman's ghost by the roadside. As the cab passes, the ghost appears on the cab's window, causing her to jolt awake from the dream. She then receives a call from a man named Patrick. She answers and tells him that she is coming and she'll be there on her own. She adds, "I haven't thought about it as I don't feel ready for it," and disconnects the call. The scene then cuts to a restaurant where 4 people are having dinner and chatting. Patrick begins narrating a terrifying story to the group. Ryan, Anne, and Jessica listen intently when suddenly a plate falls in the distance, causing them all to jump in fear. Patrick then announces that he and Anne are getting married. Surprised, Jessica says, "Anne didn't tell me." And Anne gets up to head to the washroom, with Jessica following her. In the washroom, Jessica tells Anne that she can't go back to how things were. Patrick is not going to change. She then asks, "Are you pregnant?" Anne denies it and leaves the washroom. Anne steps out, grabs her bag, and leaves the restaurant. Outside, she stops a cab and briefly glimpses a ghost inside. Jessica approaches and asks, "What's wrong? Why are you shaking?" Anne replies, "I feel like something bad is going to happen." Jessica suggests that Anne shouldn't take Patrick home with her. Just then, Patrick and Ryan exit the restaurant. Patrick tells the driver that he and Anne will be going with him. Jessica tries to intervene, but Patrick insists that he's staying with Anne tonight. He yells at her to mind her own business, and then pushes Anne into the cab, slamming the door shut. Anne bangs on the door to open it, but Patrick opens it and tells her to move over. Jessica tries to talk to Anne, but she notices the tinted windows and can't see inside. The driver asks, "Where should I take you guys?" Patrick replies, "Just keep driving." He then turns to Anne and asks, "What have I done now?" Anne responds, "I told you I need more time." Patrick asks, "How long are you going to punish me?" He adds, "I'm coming over to your place tonight." Anne replies, "Not tonight." The driver interrupts, asking, "Is it 2 trips then?" Anne responds, "Drop me off first." Patrick interrupts, saying, "Keep driving. We're not done yet." The driver asks Anne, "Do you want me to kick him out?" Anne denies. He then offers, "If you want, I can call another taxi for him." He looks at Anne carefully and asks, "Have I picked you up before?" Anne denies again. The driver introduces himself as Ian and asks, "Are you married?" Patrick responds, "We're engaged." Ian then says, "I just remembered, I picked you up from the hospital." Anne denies it, but Ian insists, "Yes, I remember. I picked you up from St. Mary's maternity." Patrick, shocked, asks, "Are you pregnant?" He then adds, "And this is how I'm finding out?" Patrick and Ian have a brief argument, and Ian tells him, "I need to make a call." He then steers the cab off the main road onto a quieter street. Ian leaves, and Patrick turns to Anne asking, "When were you planning to tell me?" He adds, "Whatever Jessica told you, she's lying. It's actually you who's keeping secrets. How do I know the kid is mine? Maybe you're cheating on me." Anne tries to open the door, saying, "I can't do this anymore," but finds it's locked. Ian returns and tells them that his son is not well. Anne asks him to unlock the door. Ian repeats that his son is not well. Patrick shouts, "We don't care about your sick son. Just drive her home." As Patrick gives him the address, Ian finishes it for him, saying, "I remember the address. I picked her up from the maternity hospital." Ian then gets out, saying he's going to get his map from the trunk. Patrick asks him to unlock the doors. Just as he opens the door, he delivers an electric shock to Patrick, causing him to collapse. Terrified, Anne attempts to open her door, but Ian warns her, "If you try to escape again, I'll fry Patrick's brain." He then ties Patrick's hands and shuts the door. Anne begins searching for her phone, but Ian opens the door and threatens to keep the phone back. He then orders her to turn around and ties her hands, securing a seatbelt around her. Afterward, he takes her phone, electrifies it, and disables both hers and Patrick's phone. Ian then closes the door and takes a seat in the cab and continues the journey. After traveling a distance, Anne pleads with Patrick to wake up. Ian responds. He had a high-voltage shock, not enough to kill him. After a while, Patrick regains consciousness. He screams, "Let us out!" and starts kicking Ian, ordering Anne to kick as well. Ian aggressively swerves the car left and right to threaten them, shouting, "Behave yourselves!" Just then, Anne notices a car behind them and screams for help, but the car passes by. Ian smirks, saying, "The windows are tinted. You can see out, but no one can see in." Anne insists, "No, I saw someone inside the cab when I came out of the restaurant." Ian denies it, replying the taxi was empty. Anne insists, "I saw her." Ian asks, "What did she look like?" Anne hesitates, saying it was nothing, and a silence falls between them. After a while, Patrick begins to cry, saying his chest hurts. Ian makes fun of him, and Patrick loses consciousness once again. The scene shifts to a flashback, where Anne is sitting in the same cab, and Ian notices her. Back in the present, Ian tells Anne, "Don't worry, we'll make regular stops to keep you and your baby fed and watered. I'm also a parent, remember? My sick son you guys didn't care about." Anne replies, "You said your son was ill. Nothing serious, I hope?" Ian chuckles. "I see what you're doing, but it's too late to get on my good side." Anne becomes frustrated. After a while, Ian stops in a quiet place. He exits the car, opens Patrick's door, and then Anne's. He tells Anne to step out for some fresh air and asks her to sit. He then offers her some water. Gradually, Ian starts forcing her to drink, and Anne begins to choke and cough. She then tells him that she needs to pee. He approaches Anne, frees her hands, and ties one of her hands to the cab. Handing her a urine tub, he tells her he needs to make a phone call. Anne removes her underwear and tosses it under the cab. Meanwhile, Ian's call goes to voicemail. Suddenly, Anne sees a woman's ghost in the rearview mirror and screams. Ian rushes back to her, ordering her to be quiet. She tells him that a woman was standing right behind her. Annoyed, he demands she turn around and ties her hands again. He then pushes her back into the cab, notices her underwear under the vehicle, and angrily throws it at her. Closing the door, he warns her that if she pulls another stunt like that, he will kill Patrick. With that, he resumes the journey. As they continue down the road, Anne asks, "Where are we going?" Ian replies, "The end of the road, my place, on Maybell Hill." He explains that the area is known as England's most haunted road. Then, he asks, "Do you believe in ghosts?" Anne remains silent. Ian then begins telling her a story. A woman died in a car crash. She was fleeing her abusive husband with her young daughter. The woman died on the spot, but the little girl survived only for a couple of days. She died alone in the woods, scared and crying for her mother. No one came to help her. Since then, they say this road is haunted. People call her the ghost of Maybell Hill. He adds, "You see her standing at the side of the road, asking for a lift. She rides with you for a while, and then she just disappears." Ian continues talking about the ghost, but Anne suddenly catches her reflection in the window. She gasps, terrified. Ian continues, "Whenever she appears, she's always after the same thing, her child." The scene transitions to a flashback. Anne is seen traveling in Ian's cab, looking uncomfortable, as if experiencing a stomachache. She asks him, "How much for the fare?" Ian replies, "Nothing. Consider it a gift for your baby." He then asks her to promise that she'll take good care of the baby. Anne smiles warmly and says, "I will." She thanks him, gets out of the cab, and walks away. Back in the present, Ian pulls over at a fuel station to take a break. He steps out of the car, leaving Anne and Patrick inside. Anne begins to cry, asking Patrick to wake up. Patrick whispers, "I'm awake. Don't let him know." He continues, "The moment he drags me out himself, that's when I'll take him." Patrick adds, "I'm glad about the baby. I've changed." Anne replies, "Jessica told me about the woman you brought back with you." Patrick responds, "She's lying." Anne notices another car outside and whispers to Patrick, "When Ian opens the door, we can yell for help." Suddenly, Patrick begins shaking violently. Panicked, Anne pleads, "Calm down," as she nervously looks out the window. She sees Ian calmly observing the car. Her heart sinks as the other car drives away. Ian approaches Anne, kisses the glass directly over her forehead, and then uses the condensation to draw a heart. He then sits back into the cab. Suddenly, Anne is overwhelmed by a terrifying vision. Her head spins and her surroundings blur. Gradually, she loses consciousness. In her dream, Anne sees an eerie, strange place with a vision of a ghostly woman. She then realizes that she's back in the cab with a baby bump. Her dream shifts as she notices the ghostly women standing by the roadside. In an instant, she appears beside her in the cab, placing her hand on her belly. Anne turns to look at the ghost. Abruptly, the scene cuts back to reality, her hands on her baby bump. Anne jolts awake, and now the baby bump is gone. Ian asks, "Are you awake?" Anne responds, "What did you give me?" He replies, "Nothing, just some sleep medication." Anne starts crying uncontrollably. Ian shouts, "Stop crying, or I'll kill you." As they continue, Anne notices a directional sign. Ian asks, "You've seen her, right?" He continues, "I first saw her on Maybell Hill. She was standing by the roadside. I stopped to let her in, but she was already there, pointing ahead. She started talking. At first, it seemed like a warning, but it wasn't. She was talking about how things are, and how they always will be. Then, I realized she was in my thoughts. She pointed at a picture of my little boy. That's when I got scared. When I looked up, it wasn't a ghost anymore. It was my wife, Elaine, saying horrible things. I stopped, looked behind, but found nothing." He continues, "She was right there, where you are now. She never left." Anne notices the same directional sign again. Ian tells her that the ghost had been there when he brought her back from the hospital. After traveling a little further, Anne sees the same directional sign once more. She asks, "Are we on Maybell Hill?" Ian replies, "We've been on it since the beginning." He chuckles, then takes a turn and parks the cab in the parking area. Ian steps out of the cab and helps Anne get down. Anne asks, "Does your family live here?" Ian responds, "Why would my family live here? It's just me." He then adds, "If you help me get Patrick inside, I won't kill him." Anne reluctantly agrees. Together, they drag Patrick into Ian's place. Ian locks the door behind them, and they place Patrick's body inside. Ian switches on the lights and gives Anne a brief tour. He attempts to call his wife, but she doesn't answer. Frustrated, he yells, "Why does she never answer me?" Anne tries to calm him. Maybe she's asleep. Ian, visibly irritated, replies, "She's always awake." He says, "It's just you and me now, and her. She's waiting for us." He tells her, "The first time I picked her up, I was terrified. I drove straight to a pub, ordered a large whiskey, and then had a few more. I just sat there, trying to calm myself down enough to go home. But when I got back, my wife didn't believe me. She accused me, saying, 'Who have you been with? Is that why you work nights?' I ended up sleeping on the couch that night. Later that night, I heard a noise upstairs. It was my son crying. I went to his room, and there she was, the woman's ghost. She was standing by his cot, hissing. I had to save my little boy, and that's when I left them." He adds, "When I came back to Maybell Hill, I brought you here for her." Anne asks, "My baby?" Ian replies, "Yes, I'll trade your child for mine." Suddenly, a loud bang echoes. Ian says, "She's here." He then goes inside. Terrified, Anne rushes to Patrick and desperately tries to wake him. Patrick groans, "Is it mine?" Anne replies, "Of course it's yours." In a rush, she grabs Ian's keys, dragging Patrick along. He suddenly mutters a confession. "The woman I slept with it was Jessica." Just then, Anne hears a chilling sound. She fumbles with the keys, desperately trying to unlock the door. Suddenly, Ian appears and electrifies Patrick. Anne screams, begging him to stop. Desperate, she attacks Ian, but he shoves her back. In anger, Ian pulls out a cutter and without hesitation, slits Patrick's throat, killing him instantly. Anne screams and bolts away. Ian stalks after her. Anne runs down the corridor when she suddenly sees the ghostly figure of the woman charging toward her. Anne manages to escape. Just then, Ian catches up and grabs her. She punches him. Ian grabs her by the legs and starts dragging her back. Anne grabs a nearby glass bottle and smashes it against him. She uses the chance to break free and runs inside. After running through the corridors, she manages to escape to the cab. She tries to start it, and just as the engine starts, Ian arrives. He drags her out through the window and shocks her with electricity. Anne's body begins to tremble. Ian then pulls out his cutter, and Anne cries out, "My baby is still alive. Don't kill me!" Ian relaxes upon hearing this. Anne then slips into a dream. She finds herself inside the cab, noticing herself by the roadside, and then she envisions hands on her belly. The scene cuts back to the present. Anne is in the cab. Ian tells her that he and Ellen had been struggling with their marriage. He adds, "But when she told me that I doesn't love my son, it shattered me. She claimed I was having affairs while she was at home, looking after for her child." "Her child?" Ian complains. "She made me feel like he was only her son, not mine. Do you know what I was doing? I was out driving this cab, trying to make money," he continues. "She told me she wanted a divorce. Then I decided if she wanted to take my son, the only thing I love, maybe I'll take away her son, the only thing she loved," he says. That thought crossed my mind. In a flashback, we see Ian about to kill his son, but in the present, he continues, "I couldn't do that. I love my son to death," he tells her. "I went out to Maybell Hill, and I saw her. She read my mind, my thoughts. When I picked her up, that's what she was telling me, smother him, smother him. She started to get into my cab because I made a deal. She can have your child, and I can have mine." In the flashback, a ghostly hand pulls away from Anne's belly. Back in the present, the woman appears in front of the cab, and Ian stops. He gets out, takes Anne down, frees her hands, and says, "I'm saving my child." "You do the same," Anne cries, revealing there is no child. "I lost it. When you picked me up from the hospital and dropped me, it left me. I have no baby inside me." Ian screams, "That won't work. Why did you lie to me?" With that, he storms off. Anne cries out and rushes to the ghostly woman, shouting, "You took my baby. You stole it." The woman vanishes. Anne cries, looking around and calling for her to come back. She hears the woman's laughter and, in anger, gets up screaming, "Where are you?" She runs into the woods, crying, desperately searching for her. Meanwhile, Ian notices the cab behind him with the engine running. Startled, he approaches, checks it, and gets inside. He drives away, but as he does, he glances behind the seat and sees it's empty. Just then, his phone buzzes. He chuckles, saying, "It's Elaine." Suddenly, Anne appears in front of his cab, and the cab crashes into her. He gets out to check, but finds no one there. He returns to the cab and continues his journey. Then, in the reflection, we see Anne sitting in the back seat. The screen fades to black as the movie ends. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the chills, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a scare. Until next time, stay spooky.